Welcome to Daily Variety, your daily dose of news and analysis for entertainment industry insiders. It's Tuesday, March 3rd, 2026. I'm your host, Cynthia Littleton. I am co-editor-in-chief of Variety alongside Ramin Satuda. I'm in LA, he's in New York, and Variety has reporters around the world covering the business of entertainment. In today's episode, we'll hear from Variety's Michael Schneider, who examines all the questions swirling around HBO as the storied brand braces for Paramount's takeover of Warner Brothers Discovery. Casey Bloys and company are waiting for signals about how the premium TV pioneer will operate under Paramount Skydance if the $110 billion acquisition is completed. But before we get to that, here are a few headlines just in this morning that you need to know. Banijay is joining forces with All3Media. The two powerhouse European production groups have linked arms in a deal valued at $8 billion to create an even bigger global production powerhouse with tentacles all over the world. All3Media has been owned for the past 2 years by Jeff Zucker's Redbird IMI media venture. Redbird IMI will own half of the company alongside with Banijay. All3Media is the home of the very hot reality show The Traitors and other formats. Banijay is known for such shows as Big Brother, MasterChef, Black Mirror, Peaky Blinders, and a host of other scripted and unscripted series. Banijay CEO Marco Bassetti was honored last year by Variety at MIPCOM with our Vanguard Award. We were right. Bassetti will be CEO of the combined company, with Jeff Zucker serving as chairman of the board. Versant reported its first quarterly earnings this morning as a standalone company. The new parent company of CNBC, MS Now, USA Network, and other former NBC Universal cable channels disclosed that its net income fell 31% last year. Advertising and subscription revenue was challenged. The results put into sharp perspective the uphill climb that CEO Mark Lazarus faces in evolving this company beyond its foundation rooted in linear cable TV. Lazarus's mission in the next few years is to grow the business in other areas while the linear cable cash is still flowing. On the Paramount-Warner Brothers Discovery front, don't miss my colleague Nick Vivarelli's great story on how the Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds are figuring into the Paramount deal. Vivarelli reports there's a lot of uncertainty as to how much the various funds are putting in. It's also raising questions about what he calls soft power at a time when tensions between the U.S. and the region are spiking as we go to war with Iran. After you read all of that sobering news, don't skip my colleague Elsa Kaslasi's great reporting on the wackiest internet-fueled conspiracy theory of the week. It involves Jim Carrey and his appearance last week at France's César Awards. Carrey accepted his Career Achievement Award in such perfect French that the social media world has speculated that it had to be a Carrey impersonator or even a synthetic AI creation, but that is simply not true. Carrey practiced his speech for months, César's chief Gregory Collar tells Elsa. All of these stories and so much more can be found on Variety.com right now. And now it's time for conversations with Variety journalists about news and trends in show business. We'll hear from Variety TV editor Michael Schneider on what the Paramount-Warner Brothers Discovery news means for HBO and its leader Casey Bloys. Paramount already has a streaming chief in Cindy Holland and a linear TV chief in George Cheeks. At this point, we're all still waiting for clarity on how HBO will be situated. And what happens to HBO Max? So many questions. Michael Schneider, thanks for joining me.
Absolutely. Here we go.
Well, it does feel like we have just been on nonstop 24/7 merger watch since about late October when all of this Warner Brothers Discovery auction business really got started. There's been a lot of focus on the state of Warner Brothers, one of Hollywood's founding studios. There's been less focus on what this all means for HBO. You've written a great story that really takes the measure of what's going on at HBO right now. It opens with an anecdote that just illuminates the situation.
Basically, when the news came down Thursday afternoon, Casey Bloys came out and said, well, it's over. And, he could be meaning a whole bunch of different things. The expectation that Netflix was going to be the new parent company owning HBO was not going to happen. And I think it had taken several months for HBO folks to really come to peace with the idea that Netflix was going to be their new owner. But they had gotten to that point. I think Casey Bloys especially had come to terms with that and also had really talked at length with Ted Sarandos about it. And folks at HBO felt that Ted Sarandos really understood the value of HBO, and they felt comfortable with moving forward. HBO would continue as its own entity. Now, this just threw all of that up in the air and brought back so much uncertainty and shock and awe that they're still sort of picking up those pieces today in Culver City.
On Monday morning, I rose early to listen to David Ellison speak to Wall Street analysts and start to sell the deal. And I was surprised that they didn't have a more fulsome response ready to say, this is our basic vision for HBO. Ellison said he wants it to operate with independence, but then made it clear that it will be combined with Paramount Plus in some fashion. You and I both know this industry is very much about pecking orders and hierarchies, and I think it really it sunk in that the idea that HBO could become a tile on a Paramount Plus operating system. No shade to Paramount Plus. That is a streaming service that was built from the ground up. It was one of the original network streaming services known as CBS All Access back in the day. But nonetheless, HBO just represented the gold standard and the certainty that it will be now absorbed by a larger entity, even with Warner Brothers Discovery and its predecessors have been through a number of sales. It was never directly to a direct competitor with overlapping operations. Mike, from your reporting, what kind of questions are people inside HBO asking? What kind of questions are people on the outside asking about what comes next?
Well, people have a lot of questions about just what does this mean? Ellison did say that HBO Max and Paramount Plus, the streaming services, will merge. But what does that mean to HBO, the brand? And where does that sit on top of this? And what's the structure going to be? Is Casey going to report directly to David Ellison? Or will he report to Cindy Holland, the head of direct-to-consumer over at Paramount Plus? And what does that mean for Casey Bloys, whose deal with Warner Brothers is up in another year? And how is this going to work in terms of it's not easy. You can't just snap your fingers and merge two large streaming services. There's a lot of back end that changes. And as the folks inside Warner Brothers have pointed out, they've done that before when they put together HBO Max and Discovery Plus. They do have that experience. So what does this mean for their product team? Paramount Plus doesn't have much of an infrastructure. So does that mean that more folks at HBO Max will actually have to stick around? And maybe that's a good thing for HBO Max. We don't know.
Paramount has said that they are really aggressively trying to fast track this. They have targeted a Q3 2026 closing date, which is the end of September. And so I am a little surprised that they haven't had a little bit more of a structure conversation, even internally. Your reporting suggests that those conversations just have not been had.
And so maybe those calls have happened today.
Now, this is less urgent, but more of a curiosity point. HBO Max, as we know, was ginned up around the time that AT&T decided that they needed to have a general entertainment streamer. But just as a point of curiosity, I think the lack of discussion about it probably tells us that it's going away, probably as soon as they can make it go away.
The question will be this new merged entity. Will it have a different name altogether? Will it be a combo of the two? And where does HBO fit in all of that? Is it an automatic part of this new service, or is it an add-on? Sort of like what they tried to do with Showtime. HBO, of course, is a much sort of larger brand than Showtime is at this point. But it's still a big question of, okay, where is HBO fit in all of this?
The obvious model that we can look at is FX. And FX got caught in that transition of linear to streaming. And so they came up with FX on Hulu, but we've gotten used to it now. So with all due respect to FX and Team Landgraf, HBO is just so much, it's been bigger and it has encompassed so much. It would seem humbling to see it as an imprint under another brand.
And that's going to be a big part of the debate. That's probably question number one on everyone's mind is, okay, who now is in charge of HBO? Who does Casey Bloys report to? Is it David Ellison or is it Cindy Holland? And what's the difference between the two? And what does that mean for Casey? What does that mean for HBO? A lot of questions still.
So many. Well, the last thought that I will leave you with was you and I both remember the days of probably the even with all the corporate drama that has gone above HBO in the last 10, 12 years, probably their worst time was after the end of The Sopranos in 2008-ish, after the end of The Sopranos, when all of their big series franchises were starting to sunset and FX was starting to come on strong. AMC network was coming on strong with Mad Men and Breaking Bad. You remember the snarky phrase in the industry was HB over, right? That HBO was never going to recapture the glory days of The Sopranos and
Right, and Sex and the City, and they were
Curb
all
Your
leaving at the same
Enthusiasm.
time. And and I'm sure we wrote that story as well here at Variety, but we were obviously proven wrong, and so you don't underestimate HBO.
You don't. Mike, as always, appreciate you talking to your industry contacts and bringing us great perspective on what's going on. It is a wild time.
It's not TV. Will it still be HBO?
I know you couldn't resist that. As we close out today's episode, here's a few things we're watching for. Steve Carell is back in a comedy series that premieres Sunday on HBO. Rooster revolves around a middle-aged guy who decides to go back to college. It comes from showrunner Bill Lawrence, who we heard from last week on Daily Variety. Variety is once again busy at festivals and markets around the world. On Friday, we'll produce the first of 3 digital dailies out of the Thessaloniki Festival in Greece. On Monday, we'll start the first of 4 digital dailies out of the Festival de Malaga in Spain. And on March 11th, we'll start the first of 4 dailies out of the CPH-DOX Documentary Film Festival in Copenhagen. We love to hear from our listeners, so please send thoughts, gripes, and other feedback about Daily Variety to podcasts@variety.com. Before we go, congrats to the children of East Tennessee. They are fortunate to live in the same time as Dolly Parton. After 90 years, East Tennessee Children's Hospital in Knoxville has been renamed the Dolly Parton Children's Hospital. Parton has long been a supporter of the nonprofit Regional Pediatric Center. She is truly one of America's foremost philanthropists. Thanks for listening. This episode was written and reported by me, Cynthia Littleton, with contributions from Michael Schneider. Sticks, nicks, hick, picks. Please leave us a review at the podcast platform of your choice, and please tune in tomorrow for another episode of Daily Variety.